Right, Wits University students have vowed to continue protests over financial exclusion, historical debt and lack of accommodation. Students disrupted classes and blocked various entrances to the university. For more on this, we're joined now by Asive, Dlanjwa, who speaks for the South African Union of Students. Good to have you with us, and thank you very much for your time. Are you surprised at all at what you are seeing happening?
Good evening, Butabo, and also good evening to your viewers and your listeners. We are not at all surprised by the protests that have been happening across various institutions in South Africa. It really, honestly, was expected. More than it was expected, it is justified based on the plight and the challenges that the students have been facing across institutions of higher learning.
Yeah. Is this an NSFAS mess? I mean, have they created this?
No, not altogether. It's a collective effort, bound by incompetence, really across various levels. You see, the big issue that we have, Thabo, is that we've got a sector that is discoordinated. We've got a sector where different components of the sector are pulling in different directions. I'm going to give you an example why we say this. And the context that I'm going to give you will give you an example. In fact, will give you an insight as to why there is the level of instability across various institutions. The first one is that you would have thought that while here we are dealing with public institutions that are under the tutelage of a government through the Department of Higher Education, then you've got NSFAS, which is also an agency of government led also under the tutelage of the Department of Higher Education. Then you've got obviously, as I said, universities. So now what happens here is that, for instance, you had NSFAS that released their funding decisions during and when registrations had already begun in other institutions. Right now, as I speak with you, Thabo, there are students who have appealed, who have not received their outcomes of their appeals, and yet registration in majority of the institutions has closed. You've got at least probably a good 100,000 students who have not received their funding decisions, and yet registration has closed or is closing in other institutions. You've got universities that are working outside the broad framework and the directives of the Department of Higher Education. Why do we say this? We agreed with the department. These are some of the things that are being faced by the students in Wits right now as we speak that has led to the protest. We agreed that there are what we call missing middle students who cannot afford to pay for themselves. We agreed that these students, if they meet the necessary academic requirements, they must be allowed to register irrespective of how much they owe, and they must sign AOD so that we do not academically or rather financially exclude people who have not been academically excluded. Now, this is the cry and the plight of the students and of the SRC of Wits University, saying our students, we've got thousands of students who qualify to go on to the next year, who are being chased away based on the fact that they do not have the funding. We had agreed that institutions must register those as students. The department had given that directive to universities. Universities are pulling in different directions. We further said that NSFAS, or rather registration, cannot close in institutions of higher learning whilst NSFAS has not concluded on their processes, because the beneficiaries of NSFAS are the poor and the working class. When you close registration before the finalization of NSFAS matters, you are effectively closing the doors of learning at the face of the poor and the working class. Because it is not the rich who are waiting to register. It is the poor who are waiting on NSFAS to respond and conclude their appeals, etc. So effectively what we have, you've got a department that is failing to coordinate the sector. There is no way. If universities have to begin their academic calendars, then NSFAS must speed up their processes. All of these are led by the Department of Higher Education. So really these problems, Butabo, are manufactured by a lack of coordination of the sector and by people pulling in different directions. Some of the issues that are there is the issue of the cap, of the 45,000 rand cap, where the government has agreed with NSFAS that they must cap student accommodation, the price that they pay for private student accommodation at 45,000 rands. And to be quite honest with you, as a union, we are in support of that, because we are of the view that there has to be a limit as to how much the state pays towards private student accommodation. Because we have seen and we know that there has been a collusion between university officials and private accommodation service providers to inflate prices ridiculously so that they could benefit endlessly from what the state is paying. And we can't pay 9,000 rand per month for student accommodation. It just does not make sense. That is a bond. That is a 3-bedroom house. It just does not make sense that the state must pay that. Because when we do that, we will minimize on the purse that will be able to fund the majority. So we will actually impede on broadening access to higher education. So there we draw the line. However, we're saying the department and universities and NSFAS were supposed to agree before the implementation of the guidelines as to how they circumvent and ensure that the children of the poor and the working class are not sleeping outside while implementing such measures.
Who should lead this coordination?
It is the department. It is government. These are public institutions, Butabo. It's not a private institution. NSFAS reports to the department. Institutions of higher learning report to the department. It is the department that must lead the coordination. You can't be leading a sector and everyone in the sector is pulling in different directions. You know what is unfortunate and very disheartening, Butabo, is that some of the challenges that we have in the sector are structural in nature. And it is not, to deal with them will not be an overnight thing. And some of them will appreciate that they require serious capital investment. However, these challenges that are seeing the students on the street, there is money for. It is just a lack of leadership in the sector. There is money to fund all the necessarily qualifying students. However, you've got institutions setting their registration before students can get their answers. It just does not make sense. So the department must lead that coordination, no one else. It is the prerogative of government to ensure that they are leading the sector and no one is pulling in different directions, because at the expense, or rather at the lack of coordinating the sector as they should, and cowering under the might of vice-chancellors, is that it is the poor and the working class that suffer. It is so bad, Butab. Their vice-chancellors, when they choose that they don't want to meet with the minister, they said, we will not meet with you, minister. If you come in, you can come, have slab chips and eat magwinya, but I'm not going to meet with you. How is it that someone who is employed, because vice-chancellors are employed by councils derive their mandate from government legislation. How is it that someone who is employed or who is led or rather under the state can choose how they deal with the institution? These are public institutions. And it can't be that in public institutions it is only the rich and those that can afford that are able to navigate the system, while the poor and the working class are not able. It is the responsibility of our government.
Some quarters are reporting an intensified protest in these areas around this financial exclusion. What needs to happen to pull the plug on this intensity, to deflate it?
Number one, I think we must clarify, in case it gets lost in translation. I should have clarified this in the beginning. We are in full support, number one, of the protests and the strikes, and we are calling on more institutions and more students that in the event that their institutions are not willing to accommodate the poor and the working class, they must take to the streets and they must ensure that everything comes to a halt until the children of the poor and the working class are catered for. to deal with this issue, Butabo, it's not difficult, as I said. Unfortunately, what we are dealing with, there is money for. Let me give you an example. So the issue, for instance, that the students of Wits are raising of the students that have outstanding debt, we have dealt with that. We have spoken with the department. We have agreed. And the department does not have the boldness and the courage to ensure that institutions are implementing. There would be no protest there. Secondly, we said to the department that they must increase the allowances of NSFAS students, and they increased it by 5%. We said 5% cannot work because the last time there was an increase in those student allowances was 2018. And the reality of the matter is that between 2018 and now, students are almost buying 60% of the groceries that they could buy with that same allowance. So we hope that we could increase it, push for a bigger increase. We were able to get 10%, and we negotiated for 10%. And yet, there are still institutions that are not paying that 10% increment to their students, while the money has been allocated. Even the minister and the chairperson of NSFAS had gone on media in a press conference and announced that 10% increase. So here you can almost see that there is almost a deliberate ploy to sabotage the sector because there's money for these things. So my point is that there are solutions to these things. First, another solution would be, don't close registration until we have dealt with all the cases of the students of the poor and the working class. So really what we are dealing with it's not that difficult. It just requires a level of leadership at the level of the Department of Higher Education, and for NSFAS also to take a stronger stance in terms of dealing with institutions. That is what will get us off this quagmire, Butabo. It really is not difficult. It is just that sometimes you see that there might really, it's either the state or the universities have an interest in destabilizing the sector for their own business interests, because there are people who benefit, by the way, from strikes. Universities pay no less than 5 million, most universities, no less than 5 million rands a day on hiring private securities to protect whatever they believe needs to be protected. So there is also, unfortunately, a somewhat of a criminal syndicate here that you are seeing. It is probably to the interest of certain university and probably even government officials that the sector becomes unstable. Because of that, there are many that are making millions on the back of the instability of the sector.
Asive, let's leave it there. Much appreciated. And thank you very much for highlighting those issues for us there. That's spokesperson for the South African Union of Students.